All right, welcome to Southeast Asian Apologetics. I'm John. We have a special guest with us today. I'm actually super excited. Dr. Gordon Nickel, PhD scholar. It sounds like you did your work in Calgary, right?
Yep, I got my PhD in Calgary, Canada, at the University of Calgary. That's right.
Under Andrew Rippin.
Yeah, I was very blessed to get a really good professor for my teaching and also for my dissertation. It was really a wonderful experience to study with someone like that.
Yeah. I read a bunch of books on Islam and all that. And Andrew Rippin is one of the big names, just like you. So that's amazing. It sounds like you've taught in Canada. Have you taught at Trinity? I looked at some of your information on academia. Did you teach in the U.S.?
Yeah, so I had chances to teach at Trinity Evangelical Divinity School, and I really liked those people. I liked the students and the other professors.
Yeah.
And so I could do these courses on the Quran. I think we called one "The Quran in the Light of the Gospel." That was amazing. And also courses on Islam in the modern world. So they were interested too in bringing things up to date. Things are changing all the time. Day by day, they're changing, and so it's hard to keep up with a course like that. But yep, I was really glad to teach in Chicago.
And to clarify, you're retired, right? But you're still very well. This is a passion. You love people. I know you're evangelical. So you don't stop. You're more passionate now than ever. Would that be a good way to put it?
Less energy than ever, but certainly the passion is there, and so I'm always writing, and
Hmm.
always so many good opportunities to write, and especially working in the area of the deity of Jesus and how we can understand it from the New Testament to
Amen.
improve our witness among the Muslim brothers and sisters.
At the end, we're going to get to some of those approaches, how to outreach Muslims. But real quick, as far as some of your where you've been, were you also doing some scholarship and missions in Bangalore in India?
Yeah, John, I was really fortunate to grow up in a missionary family in India. So I spent 6 years as a child in South India. And then later on, my wife and I went to Pakistan for 6 years. That's where we got our witness and mission experience. And then from there, we went to India to train local evangelists in witness among Muslims, and using our experience of India. Later on, still, the an evangelical seminary in Bangalore asked if I could come and lead a Center for Islamic Studies there. And that was also an awesome experience to work with the India Church to train their leaders.
I don't want this to be so much cookie cutter. This might be impromptu, off the cuff because new questions arise. So I was gonna ask this at the end, but now that you brought it up, did you ever feel like your life was threatened once or twice in Pakistan or India, um, as far as death threats or anything like that?
There was that in Pakistan, so you have to watch it. It's an Islamic republic. They're not going to give a lot of freedom to evangelists, or especially to foreign missionaries. And so we
Yeah.
were close. We were close to trouble a couple of times, but
All
by God's
right.
grace, He protected us, and people were praying for us. In India, eventually, the the city of Bangalore just wouldn't let me come back. So this is one of the hazards of being an open Christian and maybe having things on the web, and having this information about yourself. I mean, you can't avoid that. We can't hide. I
Yeah.
mean, we have to be honest. We have to be authentic, and we leave it to the Lord as to visas and all those kinds
Wherever
of
it
things.
lands. Amen. Amen. Yeah, actually, see, real quick, where I'm at, just so you get a quick background of me. I don't have a master's, PhD. I just have a bachelor's in history. But I've always been evangelical. Like I've always shared the gospel in college and stuff. And then over time, the more I did missions, eventually you run into more and more Muslims. And before, I never had that focus. And I'm like, well, Acts 17, God calls all men everywhere to repent. So I'm like, well, I need to go out and engage them. So then you start reading all these different books. You come across all different people. And of course, that's what I want to bring up. So if anybody ever gets a chance on our Facebook page or YouTube, this is one of many works Dr. Nichols has written, The Quran with Christian Commentary, a guide to understanding scripture of Islam. Like, in my opinion, if someone wanted to know more on Quran from a biblical perspective, or how a lot of Muslims see it even, and we'll get into that later on tafsir and interpretation. But I would consider this like level 1. If you want something more depth, which would be The Gentle Answer, a Muslim accusation to biblical falsification, that's a book you're really known for in the apologetic world. That would be like level 2. That's like really up there. Great book, and even on Amazon, it's just like, I think like $20. So I encourage everybody out there to go buy it. And also, I think I read where you had an article in Substack where the apologist Wes Huff, after a debate with Billy Carson, mentioned your book, and then your book, it's great. Your book sales shot to the roof. If you want to talk a little bit about that for a minute.
Yeah, you never know. So yeah, the distribution had been good with Gentle Answer, and when Wes Huff mentioned it, he has it in his sort of resources for his followers. He has a sort of a separate article on that, and he happened to list the Gentle Answer in there. And so, he's got a lot of followers. He's really a popular guy. So if he says he likes something, it's going to make a difference.
Now, have a lot of more seminaries in the U.S. Or even Bible colleges, have a lot of your either the Quran with Christian Commentary or the Gentle Answer, have either of those books been quite prevalent being sold in those markets?
Yeah, one of my good friends is at Southern Baptist Theological Seminary. They have a really good program in Islamic studies with a professor named Dr. Ayman Ibrahim. And,
He's really good.
if any of you are considering higher studies in Islam, this is good. I'll tell you why just briefly. We can talk about it later if you would like, John. You need to be able to study the Quran and Islam in an atmosphere that lets you ask questions. And in many of the university programs in the United States, and certainly in my country, Canada, there's sort of it's something really weird. It's sort of like you don't say good things about Christianity, but you always try to say good things about Islam, and you don't want to be caught out saying something negative about Islam. You guys can explain what that is all about. But if you have to study in that kind of atmosphere, and you have a supervisor who, clamping down on you, not giving you the freedom to really tell the truth about Islam, and where possible, respond to it in a intellectual and academic way. If you don't have that freedom, you can imagine. I mean, it's hard enough to go through a PhD program. Many of you know it's super tough. And so if you have an atmosphere that's not conducive to your free thinking and feeling good about your faith as a Christian, then you're asking for extra problems. So anyway, that's why I recommend
It makes
that
sense.
So he's yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Double standards, and you're right. The intellectual arenas where we're supposed to challenge quote everything, but yeah, you can't really in some cases. And actually, oh yeah, go on.
I'm on Ibrahim, just to finish that. He's promoted the book a lot, and he's been very helpful. And I've worked together with him, John, on translating the commentary of Muqatil ibn Sulaiman, because he knows Arabic a lot better than I. So we hope to get that published this year by not Biola, but Baylor, yeah, by Baylor
Okay.
University Press, and that would be awesome. So if you
I'm gonna
could,
get that book when it comes out for sure. You know, it's great you bring up these things because when I read these names on my own, I read a Muqatil ibn Sulayman. Like I don't know how to pronounce these names, so it's good to have people like you that pronounce them. I've read some of Ibrahim's you know, kind of introductory books, questions. He's had like three of those
yeah,
books, or maybe he's
good.
probably gonna come out with 4 and 5 eventually. Several other books because those first few books he came out with great. The other person I like is I also read quite a bit of Gabriel Said Reynolds. He's really good. I'm sure you've read a lot
Yeah.
of him. Um, this is a very generic question, but you know you read so much over. I think you've had 40 years of scholarship. I read. Who are like 4 or 5 names out of the a plethora of names? Who are 4 or 5 names that have really influenced you? You've read a lot of their material and 4 or 5 of their books. I know you could list dozens and dozens, but who are maybe 4 or 5 people that have really influenced you in Islamic studies or Quranic studies?
Yeah, good question. I look for authors who will describe Muslim beliefs, Muslim documents, the Quran, the Hadith, and the other parts of Islam, the way Islam works today, that they're willing to tell the truth about it, tell it straight, and they're not sort of captive to this sort of atmosphere in some of the universities that says you have to do this, you have to do that. And so I was lucky with Andrew Rippin, who has a good introductory book on Islam, and I like Gabriel Side Reynolds as well. I like a lot of his stuff. He's got one called what is the emergence? I think it's called The Emergence of Islam,
Yeah,
and
The Emergence of Islam. That's I read a part of that book.
yeah, he's good because he's sort of in between, um, let's say, the traditional professors of Islam in the United States and other places, and a newer set that asks a lot of questions about the early documents, isn't afraid to ask questions. And so one of the authors that I like a lot is John Wansbrough. Very very difficult to read his books, but
I try I tried
ultimately,
I tried reading that first book of his. I didn't know what he was talking about. He was way over my head. You need like 2 dictionaries to understand him. But of course, you could understand him.
well, no, I mean, it was a vocabulary learning experience there too. I just had to have my own glossary. And in fact, the new edition of Quranic Studies actually has a glossary. And I
Okay.
suggested that it was when I was in a course with Andrew Rippin in Calgary. I said, you know what you should really have is sort of what's sort of the dummy's guide to, or whatever you want to call it, to Quranic studies. Is, who's going to understand this? And somebody's called it the most difficult book in the world to understand. But when Andrew Rippin asked John Wansbrough, sort of, come on now, like, why don't you make it a little easier? Because he drops in Arabic, right, with Arabic
Yeah, yeah.
writing, Hebrew, Greek, Latin, and so like nobody can keep up with you. And so John Wansbrough says, "Oh, if you can't keep up with me, that's your problem. Like learn those languages." But in the new edition that Andrew Rippin put out, he has all the explanations of what those quotes mean that are in
Okay,
the
I didn't know
early.
that. That's
And
great.
again, I had done that in a graduate class, and he just laughed, and but then he stole it, and made it easier to. So John Wansbrough, very difficult, but asking many questions that others don't ask, which we should be as Christians.
So this should
Uh,
lead us to formative Islam. Well, this is a good transition if we talk about that a little bit. Is that okay?
Sure. Yeah.
Because I think there's kind of been, I think it was Robert Hoyling called it a scholarly obsession for the Islamic world, and rightfully there should be because I understand the four main sources. And if anything you disagree with, correct me. But you have the Quran, you have the epigraphic and the numismatic and kind of the little bit of archaeology, but not a lot. And then you have non-Islamic sources that are relatively early, and then you have later Islamic sources, but then those conflict. So with those four main sources, we could talk about Wansboro. My understanding of Wansboro, even though I couldn't understand the book, was the Quran was probably invented maybe 8th, 9th century in Mesopotamia. Kind of, that sounds more correct, right?
Yeah, there is that, certainly at that idea. You're right, John. The thought there is the content of the Quran doesn't seem to reflect a 7th century um, uh, context in a backwater Arabian town, right?
Yeah.
This is the thinking. Where where did where did all this stuff come from that you've put into the Quran, right? And so Wansborough and some others as well have said, which is very different from Muslim belief, that the Quran came together not in Arabia, not in Mecca and Medina, but it came in Mesopotamia, so north of Arabia, where um, yeah, Wansborough calls it a sectarian milieu. There was a situation there where there were lots of religions going on, and they were, in conversation and in conflict. And so he's saying maybe it was when Islam or the Arab armies were conquering the Middle East, and they were encountering these major populations of Christians and Jews. Try to picture it before Islam, who was living in those areas. And so, yeah, that's the thought that.
No,
You know,
let's push back on that a little bit. I love this. I really get to have these discussions. So you're gonna make my day for a month, not just a week. You're gonna make my day for a month. So I get to really pick your brain. Now I know a lot of Oriental formative Islam. They have kind of gotten rid of that Wansboro hypothesis, but they like the way he's asking questions. But my thinking is it still possible that Wansboro's hypothesis is in play for the fact that I think the earliest explicit Quran was, I just looked it up recently, a St. Petersburg Quran written in, I think, 873. Now, I know there's the Sa'ana manuscript. I know these other earlier, Birmingham. But everyone should know by this point, even though it seems that they do not, that carbon-14 dating is not a very accurate science. And it's possible that what are believed pre-Uthmanic, Uthmanic, or slightly after Uthmanic recension manuscripts, what if they are, 720, 730, 740s that come after Abdul Malik and Ibn Yusuf, and maybe, I don't know. I'm just saying that everyone seems to get rid of his hypothesis, but I think it could possibly still be in play. But the last thing I need to add for you that is I still think the Uthmanic recension makes sense for me, because reading Michael Cook in Haitham Sidki talks about the stemma, the regional variants that seem to be, if there are regional variants, that seems to confirm either Uthmanic recension, or I know you've read Shoemaker. I've also read Shoemaker. I love reading him. Or maybe it was actually the Quran was more or less compiled under Abdul Malik and Ibn Yusuf, and instead of that recension going back to Uthman, it could possibly go back to Ibn Yusuf or Abdul Malik. But anyways, I'm just throwing those views out there and I definitely want your view on it.
well, you're touching on something that's very important, John, for your listeners too. Anyone who really wants to explore this, we have scholarship of various kinds, and there's a little bit of competition or some kind of there seems to be a group of scholars that want to prove what Islam says about how the Quran came together. That is, that it was all finished by 650 AD, right? The Uthmanic, as you're mentioning it. And then there are others that are questioning that. I mean, the trick is not to, accept hook, line, and sinker everything that you get from a certain scholar. So I like Shoemaker very much. I I've been able to go to a couple of conferences with him. He's an awful lot of fun. I mean, we're laughing the whole time, but he's dead serious in his book, Creating the Quran. Uh, it it's a helpful book, John, creating the Quran, because it asks questions in a number of different areas. So you mentioned carbon dating, carbon-14 dating. So he reviews, what are the arguments that works, and then he raises questions as well. You want to find that, not people that just say, hey, carbon-14 dating. Oh man, it goes way back to Uthman. Well, come on now. Is that the end of it? Or is there any discussion, right? You
Even
don't
some
want,
carbon-14 dating goes before Uthman. I think 568 is the earliest possible range for the Birmingham. So if that's true, that's before Muhammad even before he was technically born. Just throwing that out there.
yeah, well, so Stephen Shoemaker sets these things out in probably one of the most helpful ways I've seen. Of
Hmm.
course, he has a point of view, and he's, as you mentioned, he's arguing that the Quran was settled in about 710 or in that area by Abdul Malik, and so he's gonna bring these things up, but you don't want just someone sort of preaching one side or preaching the other. You want to let's consider the evidence. Okay, what's the strength of what you're saying about this method of dating? And another one that I was able to interview when I wrote Gentle Answer was a scholar in Paris, France, and named Desroches, Francois Desroches. And so he was right on, when I wrote, he was the man. He was right on top of carbon-14 dating. So I used a lot of his stuff. Now, people may challenge him since, and why not? Let's talk about it. But for those of us who want to see Muslims come to Christ, there's no point in accepting something that's uncertain just to be on one side or the other. Let's study it. Let's see what we can make part of our foundation, and
Yeah.
then let's work from that. So we don't have to make really quick, facile conclusions real quick.
That's great wisdom. And to add to that, one more thing, because this is where I really have a hard time. I don't want to call it revisionist, because again, no one still. It seems like there's still the data is there, but you have to interpret it, and the conclusions are not quite out. So I think a lot of the Quranic, the Rasam comes from, I think, Nabatean or the north, and I think that there's verses in the Quran that talk about Sodom and Gomorrah. You pass by it day and night up in the north. It mentions Tamud up in the north. It mentions the Romans, which didn't have any access over the Hijaz area and the geography and some of the horticulture up in the north. But my question is, I've also heard of Dan Gibson about the Qiblas generally not facing Mecca, but more somewhere to the north, like Petra or Jerusalem. But then my question is, how would how would they get how do they eventually, or what would be the reason for them eventually, if all that stuff developed in the north, what would be the main reason that you understand for them putting a Mecca so far down south from all of that? Is it because of the Al Zubair and Abdul Malik war? Is that kind of the main reason, so to speak? Or I don't know any other how to get around that problem.
So just to clarify your question, so why do we talk about Mecca and Medina? Is that the question, or is it?
It's oh my bad. So it's more as if the Quran actually did not develop in the Hijaz, which maybe it didn't. Maybe it was much more north. Oh, what is the how do the, I don't want to call it revisionist, Oriental formative Islam scholars, how do they describe when Mecca came to play? I know Mecca was in a writing to like 741. So do they think it was just developed like 100 years later? And if so, what would be the reason for it forming so late? Like, why even develop Mecca, is my so to speak? Like, what would be the motive for it? Because it seems like early Islam was very attracted to Jerusalem. Um, so I don't know if that makes sense, kind of where I'm going
Right.
with.
Right. I mean, your question is complex. The story that comes to us from Muslims about how Islam began and where it began, um, comes from accounts that were written quite a bit later, right? So the
Yeah,
standard accounts of Islamic origins, the written accounts, come from approximately 200 years after the death of Muhammad, as Muslims believe it. Or like Ibn Ishaq was about 150 years later, and then, but we don't have his book. We have an edition of his book by Ibn Hisham. And so that's quite a gap. I mean, think of it, John. If there is a gap of 100, 150, 200 years
oh, yeah,
between the life of death and resurrection of Jesus and the first written accounts, like who, what scholar would ever believe it?
yeah,
But this is one of the weirdnesses about Islamic studies, that many have been willing to accept that Muslim version who would not accept it in those terms for Jesus,
yeah, yeah,
and they just sort of say, okay, well, that's settled. Let's go on and write some articles. I mean, come on now. But names like revisionist, you mentioned, or Orientalist, all these names these are negative epithets. These are people calling each other names, right? So you don't like someone, you call them an Islamophobe, You discredit people by using a certain name. And so never let that bother you in this area. Um, I often see people writing really negative stuff about Ripon, whom I had in Canada, about Gerald Hotting, who I had in London, about John Wansborough, about Stephen Shoemaker. Well, come on. This isn't recess, We're not, we're
yeah,
not fighting at recess. These are important issues that will lead to decisions and questions about what is true and
yeah, yeah.
whether the gospel is true and whether Islam is true. And so this sort of level of calling names. So you and I never, and our friends, we never need to be worried about those kinds of names that people throw. Let's read the book. Let's consider it. Is there something there that we can run with? If we say, oh, boy, this doesn't sound
Mhm.
right, you know what I'm saying, John?
Yeah, definitely. Let's stay on this for a little bit more because this is really good because formative Islam is fascinating. I think, especially since I also love history. But let's take Patricia Crone real quick. I think I can't remember. I think she died like 10, 15 years ago, if I'm not mistaken. But she was an original thinker. I mean, she would probably never use AI, all this AI stuff in her life. She's an original thinker. But talking about methodologies, she made a claim that we could know more about Muhammad than about Jesus. Whereas I find she's a super smart person, but like you said, even she didn't trust the Hadith. So do you think when someone like that makes a claim, I'm just trying to get the methodology here. And it's tough to know people's biases. When she made a claim like that, do you think she's just against Christianity, or she doesn't see that there's more evidence from the earliest accounts of the Gospels, or what's going on when someone makes a claim like that? I'm just trying to, from those coming from that angle, it's hard to say, but what do you think she's getting at with that?
Yeah, well, yeah. She came she came to notoriety with a book called Hagerism, where she's saying, hey, let's throw away what Muslims have said about the origins of Islam, and let's see what everybody else was saying at the time. That sort of approach. And that answers an earlier question that you had there about Mecca and Medina. What other information is there about these places outside of the Muslim narratives? And so this was one of the angles that she did very well. I've heard that she said something comparing Jesus and Muhammad as to historicity, but it doesn't sound right. The first stuff I read was one of her earlier books when she described the source materials for the life of Muhammad, and she said it was just sort of a wasteland of pieces here and there, and she said, "How would you ever do that?" Oh, there's a deer eating outside my door here, eating the grass. Sorry.
Nice. No, it's okay. Probably don't see that a lot. Occasionally.
And so I haven't figured that out. Was it something she came to later in life? It's just, to me, it's just weird because the earlier writings, she really expressed a lot of skepticism about the historicity of the Muslim accounts. And by the way, John, history is not a bad background for, bad foundation for moving ahead in your studies. History is a good discipline for this, and we care about history, right?
Yeah, we got sovereignty through history and all those things.
Jesus died in history. He rose again in history. I mean, we care about history. So
Amen.
we apply that to what Muslims say about their origins as well. I mean, why not? So
Let me ask you another question with, okay, let's tackle this. Actually, a few more questions on Islam, formative Islam, and then I wanted a question about the traditional Islamic methodology. I have some questions with you with regards to that, but a couple more questions. So Donner's hypothesis, and again, I'm still open to this one too. So it sounds like, and maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but the hypothesis behind it is kind of a loosely confessional believers of, Jew, Christian, and maybe some sort of other monotheistic or quasi-monotheistic, maybe Sasanian, Zoroastrianism. And then over time, it kind of made concrete or made a break, concrete Islam or made a break with those other religious groups. But when you read the Quran, there does seem to be sometimes it elevates the Christians, and then other times it castigates them. So I could understand, depending on what aspects of the Quran you take, it's possible that makes sense. But then other times the Quran is so polemic against the Christians, the Trinity is, Isa, the Father, and Mary, and it's just like, if Muslims really believe that Christians believe that, how could they ever join up with Christians? So it seems kind of contradictory to some degree. But when you look at some of the early Islam up to Abdul Malik, there does seem to be some evidence of, in at least some parts of the world, of Christians and Muslims getting along very, very well together. But I don't know, what's your take on that? Are you kind of generally agree with Donner, or not sure, or and again, that's assuming they originated from Mecca. That also presumes that as well. But what's your kind of take on that in general with regards to his hypothesis? I mean,
yeah, I think his idea was really interesting that at the first stage there were just sort of believers, right? Believers. The differentiation came later. I sometimes go, John, to some of the earliest indications of Muslim faith that we have from the Muslim side, which are the inscriptions in the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem, right? And so here we're talking something like 690. Muslims have been conquering. They're in control of Jerusalem for now 60 years, almost 60 years. And Abdul Malik is the the caliph. And what message does he write in those domes? Have you guys studied that at all? It's very interesting.
I think, didn't he write not the Shahada exactly as we have it, but something quasi Shahada? But I don't know exactly what he wrote. I think Hidden Origins. I read part of that book, and he mentioned something about that. I can't remember exactly the specifics on that.
Yeah, check that out because we don't have manuscripts, or at least for sure we don't have Quran manuscripts from 690. So what was going on? Where was the Quran at that stage? The inscriptions there are largely more than 50% about Jesus, and basically denying what Christians believe about Jesus, because in the city at the time, in Jerusalem when Islam conquered there in 636. The city was Christian. It's hard to think back to that.
Yeah.
You know, Byzantines had been there for centuries, right?
Yeah.
And now the Muslims come, and so they put an IMAX up on the Temple Mount, and they say, "Come on, Christians, we got a show for you." And what's the show? The show is, hey, it's sort of like we hear today. Jesus was a nice guy, but he sure wasn't the Son of God, and God forbid it that he should
Have a
have a son,
son.
etc. So who's the audience? It's Christians, and it's not, hey Christians, we're all together in this. Come on, let's hug each other. It's, you know what? We've conquered, and now we're telling you that you're wrong about Jesus, and we'll tell you about Jesus. So I sort of give more credence to that than some of the hypotheses and ideas that some have come up with. See, the problem is the Quran is such a mixed bag, not only with Mecca and Medina, but all kinds of different kinds of literature in that book. You read it through. You go from one surah to the next. I tried to develop that in the book that you've shown, the Quran with Christian commentary. You read surahs 2, 3, 4, 5. It's pretty tough stuff for Christians and Jews.
Yeah.
And then you hit 6, and hey, it's all peaceful, and not talking about Christians and Jews at all.
Yeah.
And
Then you
then
go back to 8, 9.
yeah, and 7 same the way. Then you get to 8, and everybody's fighting, and 9, and like this is part of the confusion. What's this all about? Where does it come from? And
Mm.
so theories like Donner's are to try to account for that diversity within the Quran and say, well, maybe at the same time there were people with different beliefs, and so you know what I'm saying there. The early years of Islam, as what you've called the formative period, there is a fascinating period, and there's so much we don't know because you know Muslim literature didn't really start appearing until about 100 years later, and maybe even 150 or 200 years later about their own origins. So certainly scholars will speculate, right?
Mhm.
But think of it this way, even Muslims, they have a story, but they don't really have evidence. There's no evidence, right, for that story,
No evidence
except,
for Mecca. There's no evidence for context of the Quran itself. Even the Sirah that, like you said, Ibn Ishaq and some of these guys, 8th century, a lot of them didn't even have full isnat chains, and that's what many Muslims hinge their hats on, and they didn't even have full isnat chains. So I'm scratching my head like, and that's what I want to get into next. If
sure,
you know,
sure.
I want to talk a little bit, and I think Gabriel Said Reynolds has really, and I agree with him on that. At least when I read the Quran, it seems that Jews, Christians, I mean, the idea of, I don't know how you pronounce the word jahiliyyah. Is that how you pronounce it?
Yeah, Jahiliyyah, yeah.
That it sounds like there's a little bit in the Quran, Allah, Manat, Aluza, and a few of these other things in there. But predominantly, it doesn't seem that paganism. I think when it's talking about mushrikun, I think we're talking about, in my opinion, and I want to hear your opinion. Absolutely, that's why you're here. But I think it's talking about those who have added something alongside of Allah, or maybe a henotheism of a few other god intermediaries, maybe angels. But a rank paganism, just you can't find it in the Quran. So I think it's predominantly Jews and Christians, and of course I don't doubt there are some pagans there, but to think that they're the primary audience, if that's the case, then who's the Quran talking to? What do you agree with or disagree with that understanding?
Yeah, who's the audience of the Quran, right? Whom
Mm-hmm.
whom was it written for, written to? Well, the word you used there, mushrikeen, so the basic word there is shirk. Shirk is the word for associating, So often this is the accusation of the Quran, such and such people are associating something with Allah, right? And so what is this? Is this idol worshippers, or who exactly are these people? I found when I was writing the commentary and I was trying to be consistent and helpful there, that often when that language comes up, shirk or mushrikeen, it's also talking about Christians and what they say about Jesus. So the accusation is that you're making an associate, you're making Jesus an associate of Allah, or Isa, if you want to call him that, in the Quran. And so you need to look at that carefully by context and so on. And I think you're right that you don't find so much about the pagan past in, let's say, in Arabia as many tell in the story. So that story of origins is about all these pagan tribes. Yeah, good question.
I just read recently, I don't know if you read this book recently, I read Reynolds' recent book on Christianity in Arabia. I just forgot the title, but I think he mentioned Al-Jalad, if I'm not mistaken. I don't want to, I got to get my facts right, but tentatively, I think he said that within the rocks, epigraphic or epigraphy, or however you pronounce that word, within that, a lot of the paganism seemed to die out 5th, 6th century within the rocks. Well, if Islam is early 7th century, there's hardly any paganism around. So, have you heard that argument recently, or?
That's certainly a new area of study that's more like archaeology. Even since I wrote Gentle Answer, and we need to pay attention to that. And some very fine scientists and what would you call him? Well, certainly, to start looking at the rocks and see what's written on them
Mm-hmm.
are things that very few have done. So we say we don't have evidence for Mecca and Medina. Like, can you go into those cities and dig down and find the foundations of a Muslim city? So some treat it that way, and it's very hard to find that. But he's saying, okay, we're finding these rocks scattered throughout the desert, and they have different words on them. We're deciphering those and looking at what they say about maybe monotheism, and then trying to date them to, as you say, 6th century, 7th century, to try to get an idea what the situation was in Arabia before. I think it's a very good idea. I really like what they're doing. And again, it's not something we just say, oh, well, cool, we accept it. No, have a good read, have a good study. Does it sound true? Or is the methodology good? Can you trust this? And then face it. If it seems to say something important about the origins of Islam, pay attention. And yeah, so yeah,
Oh,
it's an important it's an important new area of study that gives an extra dimension to what we know about Islamic origins.
mm-hmm. That's great. And with regards to the Quran, as far as the book itself, there's of course a handful, 7, 8, various ways to more or less arbitrarily define the themes. But narrative, laws, eschatology, polemics. But do you see that it's a lot of it really is? I don't agree with Reynolds on everything, but I mean, I think he's right. It's really a lot of it's trying to be homily. It's trying to be preachy. It's trying to get the people to repent. You see that if the early surahs were really early Meccan surahs, you see that in the early Meccan surahs. So assuming that Muhammad and there's a few other or he's the only prophet in the Quran, and again that's questionable, but assume that's true. Would you see that it seems to be, in my opinion, and I think Shoemaker said this, but he does talk about the last hour. The last hour. He seems to be thinking. And I know in late antiquity there was, Byzantine Empire thought more or less these are the quote end of days. Jews kind of thought this way. Sasanians, I think Shoemaker even mentions they kind of thought that. So almost everybody in late antiquity was thinking, this is like the end of the end. And if Muhammad thought this way, then it seems that he started out as just a mere messenger, his version of the gospel, his version of glad tidings, and he was more just kind of a preacher. Is that kind of how you view him as well, or do you kind of view him with some nuance and differences there?
Yeah, I'm a little skeptical about Muslim sources on Muhammad. You know, if it's true, these stories of Ibn Ishaq and Al-Waqidi and Ibn Sa'd, and also Tabari as well. If these stories are true, you have an awful lot of detail. It's amazing. It's just unbelievable the amount of detail you have about this person. But as we said, they're late. When you study this in most universities, they'll tell you, oh well, Muslims had good memories, so they could let 100 years go by and they'd still remember. Well, maybe not. Stephen Shoemaker says no. He has a whole chapter on this, or maybe two, on sort of the science of memory, and he's just saying, "Come on, guys! Like, why are you saying this about Muslims that they can remember for 200 years and all the details, like um, infinite detail, and you're skeptical about Christianity when there's like 30 years between Jesus' death and resurrection and Paul writing it down, 1 Corinthians 13, like 15.
Oh, yeah.
Why don't why are you treating this so carelessly? Like apply the same standards and don't just subscribe to something because it's popular or you feel threatened or whatever it may be. And so I agree with you, John. There's a lot of eschatological material in the Quran, certainly end times material, lots of punishments, lots of rewards. Certainly, this is a big. Um,
I think Jahannam is mentioned over 100 times, if I'm not mistaken.
wow, that's that's a lot. And so, absolutely, I agree with you there. At the same time, when you have material that shows conquest, that shows fighting, that shows conflict, nobody's thinking of end times there. They're thinking of winning, and they're thinking of killing the enemy. There's not a mix, and so Muslims have you know, reasoned this out for the different materials of the Quran, where you have a lot of violent surahs, but you have peaceful surahs as well. So what was going on? Well, that fits into Mecca when things were peaceful, and Medina when Muhammad got power and started fighting. Well, maybe not. We have no evidence for that actually. All we know is that we have these two or three different kinds of material in the Quran. So
Hmm.
I think you can overdo it on eschatology. Certainly, lots of end time stuff. So, was this earlier in the career, later in the career? Um, I don't think it's necessary to really have a firm opinion on the historicity of Muhammad's life to study the Quran and know its contents, right? Studying the Quran, knowing its contents, is what we would need in dialogue and in witness among Muslims, right? But maybe you think we should come down firmly on this, either for or against the historicity of Muhammad. But as you mentioned, isnad, maybe you want to talk about that more. Isnad is the chain of transmission, right? So so and
Yeah.
so told so and so told so and so, and so they worked it out into a fail-safe sort of system from when it was written down, the chain all the way back to Muhammad, right? And what are the chances? Because as you said, some of these early sources didn't have isnad.
Hmm.
For example, Mokato's commentary has no isnad. He's
No,
giving
I
the
didn't know
meaning.
that. It's great.
He's the earliest guy that we have, the earliest complete commentary. So, so you know how some of the great scholars of Islam, Joseph Schacht was one of them, said, "Listen, hadith isn't what you think it is. You know, this isn't this isn't pure history. There's a development here, and so he explains this in his books.
Yeah, I
So,
think he mentions real quick, rigging the isnad. The isnad, the more perfect the chain, the more it's likely to be false. Back projections, like you said earlier, with more material. That some people that have more isnad chains. Anyways, there's so many. I'll let you take off on that one, but you're right. But what's your view of? I really want to get your view of this then with Muslims. So if we don't know the whole view of the formative years, but we also don't know that there's a chance that the standard narrative is relatively true also. Um, Actually, I want to go into that later with our approaching Muslims, but because this is a channel also for evangelism, because that's at the end of the day that's a big deal. We could go into it now. When we're approaching Muslims, do you think we should just give them the benefit of the standard narrative? Because even that is quite easy to refute as far as when we compare it with the Bible and their standard narrative. I mean, we have more evidence, we have more consistency. So how do you approach Muslims in general with regards to that? I mean, because for example, one last thing here, and then let you take it. Like even the Hadith though, there's a lot of criteria of embarrassment there. And now I'm not saying that Christians should approach a Muslim and start asking him about Aisha right off the bat. That's probably not going to be a good way to approach Muslims if we really want to share the gospel and truth and love. But there is a lot of criteria of embarrassment in the Hadith, which makes me think that some of it probably is true. Again, it's hard to ever substantiate it, like confirm it. But what's your view on how to approach Muslims, criteria of embarrassment for some of these things, or maybe at least agree with Muslims that there is a common core going back to Al-Aziri? What's your view on that?
yeah. Well, you're pointing out something that we may need to differentiate in our work as Christians. So, as scholars, we might have a view of Islamic origins and its historicity, and so on. And when we're dealing with Muslims, we're dealing with people whom God really loves, whom He made in His image, whom Lord Jesus died for. Um, who are special as people, whom we love as people. And so when they tell their story, we treat it on the level of this is something that they believe. It doesn't force us to believe it. We can discuss the story with them. We can keep the story separate from its historicity. And so we can, if they want to tell tales about Muhammad and how he acted with his wives, or anything else,
Miraj, Night
yeah,
Journey, yeah.
we can discuss that according to what Muslims have written, without needing to right away raise the question of its historicity. The historicity question for Christians is more like, you know, when you're talking to a Muslim and the Muslim makes these kinds of claims from their story, are you going to feel threatened by that? Are you going to sort of get tongue-tied because, oh, well, they said that? Or do you have a perspective that holds these things, what would you say, takes them with a grain of salt,
Hmm.
is not forced by them,
Yeah,
um,
absolutely.
but you can talk about the story. Let them say what they want. I remember, my friend in Karachi, you know, he wanted to say something nice about Jesus, and he said, "Well, Gord, did you know that when Muhammad was circumambulating the Kaaba in Mecca, he was going around and he saw this guy there that he was really curious about and didn't know who that was. And and so then he asked his friend, who is that walking around there? Nice looking guy. And so his friend says, "Oh, well, that's Jesus there walking around the Kaaba." You know, I mean, what do you say to that? I mean, you can't. I mean, obviously it's fanciful. It's made up.
Hmm.
But he's trying to say something. He's trying to say something nice about Jesus,
Yeah.
right? At that point, he's not trying to oppose me. And so, well, I want that friendship, I don't want to blast him right away and say, how can you believe that? What's the matter with you?
Yeah.
No,
No,
I want, he's Anwar, he's my friend. I love him. And so
mhm.
you're dealing with a story without feeling threatened by it.
Yeah.
And also, may I say, but you can disagree with me if you want, John, not to use it in a wrong way, say about Muhammad's wives and stuff. I was at a debate, public debate in Chennai, what used to be called Madras in east coast of India a few years ago. And the Muslim debaters were really good. There was a guy that knew all the, um, you know, knew the differences between the Greek manuscripts of the New Testament and stuff. Like he had this great PowerPoint, and like he had really prepared, and he was really
Hmm.
strong. Um, and the Christian guy's turn came, and he says, "Oh, did you know that Muhammad had a demon, and there's people trying to get it out of him, and blah 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 blah." And so then the Muslim side had to defend Muhammad. They completely lost their train of thought, and they started defending Muhammad. And I'm thinking, come on, guys, like, what are we about here?
Yeah.
You can, you know what I'm saying, John? You,
Yeah.
what are you thinking? Is this just about confusing the other side? No, it
I mean,
can't
if
be that.
I see my approach is, no, I agree with you. It's kind of a case by case basis, and in the long term, yeah, you really got to meet people where they're at. And for me, I'm not offended with Muslims because if I was born in their situation without the grace of God, I would probably be a Muslim too. So I would want someone that had the truth, even if I didn't know that they had the truth, to have patience to me. But yeah, I've been a part of a few formal debates actually. The problem with me, and this, again, it's not about me real quick, but it was too broad. It was about the Bible versus the Quran, and there's so much material. Like for me, if it wanted to be more beneficial, if we want to talk about, what is a prophet according to the Bible, according to the Quran, then I think it would be fair game to say like, well, if the guy thought he was demon possessed, do you really think he's a prophet? And then you could bring up some of those things like the satanic verses, because that's in their own history. It's not like, you know what I'm saying? But yeah, I think in that environment, like you said, people are just losing the people are getting so all over the place that there's no focus. And are you just there to make fun of someone? Or are you there to but at the end of the day, our goal is always to share the gospel. But go on, and then I have some more things to ask you here. If you have about, what time is it? 11:03. If you have maybe 17 more minutes, if that's okay, 17 more minutes.
That would be okay. Yeah. hmm The sun's gone down here. John, I'm
Oh, it's
looking across. I'm looking across a lake, and there's a snow-capped mountain uh, uh, beyond the lake. It's still
beautiful.
got snow on it, but
Hey,
yeah,
real quick, before I ask my next question, have you ever been to the Philippines or Indonesia or any of those places, Southeast Asia?
we just touched down in Manila once on our way to South Asia. So I'm sorry. I would really like to have a better experience. What's that, Glenn? Oh, yeah, we've been to Indonesia and Malaysia. We spent quite a bit of time there, but not in Philippines, which I hear good things about. And actually, we really like the Filipinos in Canada. And they're in the churches too. I was at a great church in Calgary then, and they're in the band. And
Yeah.
so we really love Filipino, especially Filipino Christians. But yeah, sorry, we haven't had that chance to take in the country more.
No, that's great. Yeah, they're very hospitable here. They persevere through, a lot or a little. I mean, they're very very kind. The English is part of the reason why I went here, because they speak so much English. I don't really have to learn another language per se. I know a little Tagalog, but nothing fluent. But 15 more minutes here. I got some stuff I really want to get talking with you here. I talked with a
Sure.
Muslim about a week ago in Manila, an imam, a young man, 25 or so. And he's like, hey, if you really want to learn Islam, he's like, don't learn from the scholars in the West. And again, that's his opinion. But what I find interesting about that, and I want you to reply, is if you were to go to Indonesia, a lot of those Indonesians learn from the West, and they don't believe they're compromising their Islam. But I want to talk about how the quote Ummah, if I'm pronouncing that right, across Islam thinks they're so united, but then you have Sunni, Shia, Sufi, Ibadi, Wahhabi, and of course everything's from the into World War II and the Ottoman collapse, and those things have happened. Um, and so, with your own personal experience with Muslims, I want to break down because I never really met a Sufi. I'm sure there's a handful of Sufis in Bangalore and in India for sure. What's your experience dealing with them? Are they relative? Generally speaking, close. I mean, they seem to be more closer in Shia with the mysticism and all that. But have you had some really good conversation with them? Are they open to Jesus? Have you? What's your dealings with some Sufi Muslims?
Yeah, I know there's been quite a bit of writing on that, including from missionaries that have been in Philippines. Um, what was this famous one that wrote about this a lot? Phil Parshall. Yeah,
Okay,
Phil
I have to check him out.
Parshall.
I don't know his name.
Yeah,
Is he
he.
what university is he?
Well, he was a missionary there in
Okay,
Philippines,
missionary.
but he wrote a lot about Sufis perhaps being more open, and the idea there for your listeners is simply that Sufis are more mystical. They're not so heavy on the law. Maybe there's more room in their minds to think more broadly and to think maybe better about Jesus than Sunni Islam allows them to. Um, though, what we found in India and Pakistan, and I've read this in testimonies as well, that also when you get into a mystical world, unless if the Holy Spirit isn't there,
Yeah.
what's there? If they're talking about spiritual activity, who is that? What is that? Right?
Mm-hmm.
Like
God
the
of
the
Israel.
Holy Spirit will glorify Jesus.
Yeah.
And so when you don't have the Holy Spirit, but you have spirit activity, and I believe in it among the Sufis in India, it can be very heavy. The power of some of the Sufi leaders to do what we'd call magical things, like really change things, is incredible, and people believe in it, and they're very, very loyal. I mean, uh, they just love the Sufi leaders. But I ask, okay, does that make them closer to believing in Jesus or embracing Jesus, or will it drive them away? Will it be a sort of a magnetic force keeping them back from Jesus, you see? And
Mm-hmm.
so I'm not sure that that Sufi helps. It may be. Um, when I was in Pakistan, a little story of we had we had a Bible study group going on in Karachi with Muslims that weren't so very committed to their faith. So they were more, what do you
Phenomenal.
call? Yeah, they were willing to study the Bible with us. It's pretty open
Okay.
minded. And so I
Nice.
thought, oh, this is great. And in fact, we had it right in a room off the cathedral there in Karachi. But we went to another village once to visit some friends, and I talked with the pastor there. And I told him what we were doing, and he smiled and he said, "Well, Gord, that sounds great, but what I'm doing is I'm making friends with the imam. I'm making friends with the leader of the mosque. I'm building a relationship with him. I'm I'm discussing with him. I'm building up a foundation upon which we can discuss some tough topics. But he says, Gord, where you're in Karachi and you're with some Muslims that aren't really serious, I like to be with the Muslims that are very serious, because when they come to the Lord, which I'm working for and praying for, they will be like the Apostle Paul. They will be serious. They will take it. They will provide leadership that other Muslims can't. What do you think about that? There's an idea there that we shouldn't be looking just for people that are sort of falling off the edges of Islam, but we really should go toe to toe. I mean, in a loving way, in a friendship way, with
Hmm.
those leaders of Islam that could really make a difference when they come to the Lord. What do you think?
Yeah, that's that's good. No, I running into hell with the water gun. No, I agree. I've always told people if you could convert one Mormon, you could 100 Christians after that, because they're going to be so serious and evangelistic once they come to the faith. No, that's great. How about your wife? How has she been influenced in your studies? Because I mean, you got to be academically, you got to study a lot. Her patience. And by the way, do you have any children?
Oh yeah, so we have
Can you hear me
three, and
then?
we took them all three to Pakistan when we went. And can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah, yeah, I'm good now. Sorry. Yep, you're good. And by the way, while you're
Yeah.
explaining, is any of your children today missionaries?
No, we wish they were. Especially our oldest son. He was a natural. Um, you might say a natural missionary when he was a kid. Just totally part of Karachi street life. And John, he used to, when he came home from his American school, he used to go to his friend's house next door, his Pakistani friend, and he
That's
took
great.
off his school clothes, and his Pakistani friend gave him a shalwar kameez to wear, and that's how they played. So I always think of him as a great missionary. So we're praying that he will get the spark and want to serve the Lord with really his considerable, you might say, gifts to meet Muslims and to hang out with them.
And while we're at it, if you ever want to send him to the Philippines, I would love to meet him. Could spend a month here and see how he likes it. Is he married or no?
Yeah, yep. He has a wife and two daughters. So we were with them for these 3 months when you and I started corresponding. We were out there with him on the other side of the Rockies, and we just came back here. So yeah, well, sure. I'll tell him that you'll welcome him there when he comes.
Oh, I would love it. My wife, we've been married since 2018, and we have two kids. So yeah, again, I don't have very many friends in this. Real quick, just a minute. The work God's doing here. I actually have two or three. No, actually four. I forgot four friends. All of them are pastors. Actually, that the more we just started doing this in the last few months, they're more and more interested about engaging Muslims and other groups and so on to evangelize them. There is something starting to work in our area, in our island. We're right pretty much in the center of the Philippines. But I think with globalization, with more and more Muslims, with all the stuff that you see on YouTube, some of it good, some of it not so good, but generally, at least there's a conversation going. And the works that are out there, I think that there's no better time to be a Christian from the standpoint that there's so much material that I'm not saying you have to be self-taught. I mean, part of me, my kids are under 5 years, two kids are under five. But if you could, yeah, go to get a formal degree, that's good. But if you can't, the stuff that you got out there is incredible. There's no reason to not engage your neighbor wherever you're at, Muslim or non-Muslim. So, and people like you are a big part of that. But 5 more minutes left here. I was going to ask you. So you would agree with this approach? Sorry, here this is an important one because I read this one in the past, but I don't know if people are actually doing it. I think people are supposed to be doing it, but again, you mentioned this early on in our conversation. Like we can't be secret. I've heard of the idea that if someone is becoming a Muslim, they should still attend the mosque and stay a secret Christian, but they can pray to the Trinitarian God in a mosque and act like they're Muslim. For me, when you read the Bible, it could cost you your life. Now we hope it doesn't cost those people their life, but it could. And I just think that's not a biblical approach. But I've heard people saying that that's what they should do. Missionaries saying that that's what some Muslims should do. What would you say to that approach?
Yeah, that, that a lot of those ideas came up after we'd started our missionary life, and they were new ideas that we met maybe in the 90s or the 2000 around then, and there was some very strong advocates of that approach. My own theological background really values the church. I need the church. I need what the church brings. And our experience in Pakistan, John, and India as well, is that new believers from Muslim background, new Christians from Muslim background, they need a new community, right? Because they're losing their own. Their family may reject them. They may be in danger. The mosque may be after them. Who's going to be their new family now? Family is biblical type of imagery, isn't it? A new community, a new family. Who's going to pray for them? Who's going to hug them? Who's going to cry with them? And
Yeah.
so, however it looks, I'm not saying this is about foreign missionaries doing all this, but I'm saying, as say a group of such people, Christians from Muslim background would grow, they have to give value to the church, the called out
Definitely
ones,
agree.
whatever you want to say. And so keep going to the mosque and praying there. It's got to be tough. I mean, if you don't have the backup, I don't think you could even do that. To keep going to the mosque and trying to do a Christian prayer. You need brothers and sisters around you to just embrace you, to eat with you, to laugh with you, read the scripture with you, sing with you. This is what you need as a new Christian from Muslim background. So I haven't been able to see eye to eye with some of these friends, like from Fuller Theological Seminary and so on, wherever they came from. God bless them. You do your work as the Lord shows you. I'm not gonna, fight you or argue with you, but we can disagree on some of these things. I think we really need the body of Christ in this.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. The New Testament, I mean, church cries about with his blood, sanctification. Yeah, I totally agree. So that's I wish we could talk a little bit more about classical tafsir and some of those things, but I wanted, especially for our audience and for me also, I enjoyed it. I think our audience is going to enjoy it. In the future, maybe 4 or 5 months down the road, if it's okay for you, I would love to kind of go into classical tafsir, tabari, ibn Kathir, ask you some questions there if we could. That would be, but just for having you on today, I'm so thankful, Dr. Nickel, and as a brother in the Lord. So thank you so much.